Alpha 75.
Incredible feats of balance, skill and daring on view now in a review of the World Trials Championships.
This year, the Yorkshire Dales in England is the venue for the first stage of the 1989 World Trials Championship. Fantic Motor of Italy have Thierry, the 1988 World Champion, within their team, and they also hold the French, Italian and British Championship titles, with riders Thierry with the French, Donato Miglio and Steve Saunders holding the other two respectively. This indeed is talent in depth, making Fantic Motor the team to beat. But as you'll see, the competition is fighting back with more and more technical sophistication.
The bad weather, which usually hits England at this time of the year, doesn't help the Latins too much. So Frenchman Thierry contents himself with fourth place, letting this man, his stablemate Steve Saunders, local and British champion from 1983 to 1988, go through to win the first round of 1989. Jordi led the 1988 championship until pipped to the post by Thierry at the final round in Poland. He's also having problems with the mud, but still manages to come 6th overall in this opening trial. Steve Saunders takes to the weather like a duck to water. He's on a 305 Fantic, successor to the 303 bike, with its magnesium engine and certain vital parts of the bike in titanium, which despite its characteristics makes it a little more refined than the 303, especially for such slippery conditions as these. Three times world champion Thierry He must remind himself that he's got a difficult weekend ahead of him on his brand new bike. And a very good ride by the Frenchman Philippe Bellatier on his Beta. Bellatier was a member of the victorious French team in last year's Trial de Nation.
The final placings in the first round of the season brings victory to the Englishman Steve Saunders on a Fantic bike, leading the Italian Bosis and Frenchmen Bellatier and Michaud, Italian Miglio and the Spaniard Tarez. A change of scenery for the second stage 7 days later in the north of Ireland, or to be more precise, Belfast, with less rain certainly, but the ground is just as wet.
And this is something that's become almost a ritual for the sport. It's inspecting the course, studying each section, and deciding which are the best routes to take without putting your foot down. Philippe Berlatier in third overall in the world standings. He's very fit indeed, and in fact the first beta rider into the section. Now Diego Bosis, he's second in the points table, and the first into the section with the new water-cooled pumper, an altogether quieter bike with its distinctive wailing sound. This heralds the start of a new technical era for trials bikes. The engines are designed to give maximum torque at low revs, an entirely different philosophy from the high-speed road and race bikes. And second in the 1988 World Championship, Spaniard Jordi. He's made a slow start to the season, but even so, here he's up into the top 6. And in Ireland, he comes 4th. A nail-biting point in the event with the world champion. He's always finely balanced. He won the title with his own distinctive style, leaving the spectators wondering all the time whether he was about to fall off or put a foot down. But he catches the bike at the last moment. Absolutely a thriller minute to watch this man. Beautiful balance. And that's another clean for Thierry Michaud. And there's a sharp contrast in the way Steve Saunders rides his bike. He seems to be part of it. Delighted, of course, with his victory in England the week before, and here he takes an excellent second place, and therefore keeps the lead in the World Championship points race. Most of these sections are in woodland, giving the riders problems as it's very slippy. There's a time limit, and no one can afford to hang about. A great performance by Donato Miglio here, overcoming difficult terrain with fine handling of his bike. The result, 5th place at this stage of the event. Even the most experienced riders can make mistakes when judging a tricky section. If you go too fast, you can't always rely on lady luck to get you through. So here's the champion, Thierry Michaud, having to adapt each week not only to the different ground conditions, but also to his powerful new bike. Of the Latins, he's probably adapted best to the typical British conditions.
Thierry Michaud on a Fantic bike therefore wins the Irish stage ahead of his teammate Steve Saunders, followed by Italian Bosis, Spaniard Tarez, Italian Miglio and the Finnish champion Peter Kahn. After Italy, the riders met up in America, in Nashville, Tennessee, for a short North American tour. In 1988, the World Championships didn't visit America, but Scandinavia instead. There's a nice atmosphere, and everyone's in a good mood for scrutineering. No doubt the wonderful spring weather's helping to warm the spirits. Steve Saunders isn't too upset about losing his leadership to his teammate Thierry Michaud.
Jordi, fresh from his win in Italy, had a few problems early on. Even the best riders can make mistakes, and a simple fault cost him 5. Let's remind ourselves of how the riders are marked. As long as you keep moving, you lose just 1 point when you put your foot on the floor. But you can only lose a maximum of 3 points in any one section. So after you've dabbed 3 times, you can dab as often as you like. If you stop going forward, though, and touch the ground, you fail the section and get a maximum of 5. A rider who goes through the section without putting a foot wrong gets a clean, which is 0 penalties. You can cease forward motion as long as you stay balanced on the machine. If while stopped you lose your balance and touch the ground, it's a fail and you lose 5. 3 times world champion Belgian Eddy Lejeune, who did well for Honda from 1982 to 1984, is now a works Montesa rider. Don't forget that Montesa was bought out by Honda themselves. In spite of this fall, Eddy still took 11th place in the final classification and ahead of his teammate. Now Diego Bosis on his Aprilia. He's having a great season and takes 2nd place here in Nashville. With 2 seconds and 2 thirds, Diego is now 2nd in the overall championship standings behind Thierry Michaud. Diego wants to completely forget about his poor season last year, when he could only manage to come 5th in the World Championship. Thierry Michaud is normally very relaxed on this kind of ground, but he made several mistakes at the start of the day, probably due to nerves and a lack of concentration. He finished 3rd on the podium, 21 points behind the winner. And here, winning for the 2nd time in a row, Jordi. I wonder whether it's his boost of morale or the new bike that has helped him to win. Other riders resent the competitors with new bikes. A new bike gives its rider a psychological advantage, and it has the opposite effect on the competition.
Jordi therefore came in ahead of Bosis, Michaud, Avala from Finland, and the other 2 members of the Fantic team, Miglio and Saunders. Mid-season and after 6 Grand Prix, Jordi is leading the points table on 103 points with Thierry Michaud on 97, Diego Bosis on 88, Steve Saunders on 74, Donato Miglio on 70 and Philippe Berlatier on 51 points.
This is Screensport, the European sports network. Using the very latest computer-controlled equipment and high-tech satellite broadcast techniques to bring you the best sports action from all 4 corners of the globe. Entire championships, from the qualifying rounds through to the finals. Whole series from the first day of the season through to the last. And if it warrants world attention, we broadcast it live. This is real sport. This is Screensport, the European sports network.
Eighth round in the World Trials Championship, Spain, a country with a fanatical interest in all forms of bike competitions. The 23rd running of the Trial de Saint Laurent is a Spanish contribution to the championship, and we're at the Saunders up in the limestone hills which form the border between the Catalan and Aragon regions. The nearest town is Lleida. In the past, Spain was seen as the capital of trial biking, with well-known manufacturers who since disappeared like Bultaco and Ossa, with Montesa saved by Honda, making their comeback this year. It's great to be back in Spain for this Grand Prix trial with a very technical and specialised course.
would imagine that as in France for Thierry Michaud, here in Spain, Jordi Tarris will have the same pressure on him, with his public expecting him to do well. Though he has the threat of Thierry Michaud putting a stop to his run of consecutive wins. Thierry will be hungry for a good result, as after the Swiss Grand Prix, he is lying 11 points behind Tarris. If there is one rider likely to spring a surprise, though, it's this man, the Italian Diego Bosis, who has the skill, when he chooses to apply it, to leave the two professional leaders behind in his dust. At present, Diego is 18 points behind the leader Tarris. Steve Saunders is lying in 4th place on the leaderboard, 38 points behind Tarris. He's also having a great ride in the second half of the championship after his bad luck in the opening half. After his win in Britain and his second in Ireland, it all went badly wrong for it. Donato Miglio, 5th in the points table, 40 points behind the leader. Should do well here, as this is his kind of course. Unfortunately, the Tenassa Motorcycle Club showed little respect for the history of trials in Spain, and the 23rd Trial de Saint Laurent was almost an embarrassment to the World Championship. Badly laid out sections, lots of dust, no information released to the public before or during the event. So an event which has such a tremendous tradition, an event we've enjoyed so much in the past, turned out to be a huge disappointment. It's 100 degrees in the shade, and once again Thierry Michaud has problems with the heat. But he still manages to finish second because Bosis is also delayed with an overheating Aprilia and moves back to third. Since the beginning of the 1989 season, the queues at the start line of each section have been getting longer and longer, and Cheltenham's Steve Saunders found it hard to get into the section at all. And he's not pleased at all, coming in 5th with a total of 122 penalty points. With Donato Miglio in 4th place at this trial, the Fantic Motor Factory has got 3 riders in the top 5. Encouraging signs for the 1989 World Championship team. But it's that little devil Jordi Tarris, unbeaten since the Italian Grand Prix, who wins this Spanish round, despite tough competition from the young Bosis, who seems unstoppable at the moment. A really exciting finish.
Jordi wins with a total of only 81 penalty points ahead of Michaud, Bosis, Miglio, Saunders and Avala. On the morning of the German Grand Prix, some riders hope that rain will bring them a change of fortune. They prefer the wetter conditions to the dustier ones of recent trials.
Jordi Tarris, who doesn't enjoy riding in wet conditions, however, is wondering what the day's results will bring. Thierry hopes that his teammate Steve Saunders, who loves these conditions, will win here so that he and Torres are left to fight it out for the title on the final event in Luxembourg. But it's not to be, as Steve Saunders has bad luck and only comes 5th in the German Grand Prix, leaving Tarris and Michaud to fight it out for the championship. At least his experience in these conditions allows him to beat arch-rival Miglio. Despite being 20 points behind at the beginning of this event, Thierry starts with a positive attitude as usual. He completes a good first lap, but in the last of the 3 laps, he picks up twice as many penalties as Taras. Taras is now so far ahead in the points table that a win now means the championship is his.
So Taras wins the German Grand Prix ahead of Aprilia, MICHAUD, Bosis, Saunders and Miglio, and in winning the World Championship regains the title he first won back in 1987. The last Grand Prix of the season takes place in Wacken in Luxembourg. The World Championship title already belongs to Taras, but the battle is still on for the runners-up.
Amos Bilbao must do very well here to make up for the mistakes he made in earlier Grand Prix rounds. And he does it, a superb 6th place for this young trials rookie. This is perhaps the last time we'll see the Belgian ace Eddy Lejeune in action. He came in with a good ride to take 5th place. A consistent rider throughout the championship, although he has been troubled by injury. With the pressure of trying for the championship title now gone, Thierry can relax and ride at his own pace, enjoying himself after a trying season. He was never far away from the invincible Taras. He was always at his heels and now waits impatiently for next year to have another go. He was 3rd here in Luxembourg. And finishing in a surprising 4th place on this trial, the Finnish rider Jan on his Beta. Peter had hoped to score better in the World Championships, but it would seem that this level is his peak. And the same goes for Donato Miglio, who's had some good results this year. He's capable of good and bad, and here in Luxembourg finishes a disappointing 8th.
So Jordi Taras wins his 10th consecutive Grand Prix round this season ahead of Bosis, MICHAUD, Jan, Lejeune and Bilbao. The moral of the story is that despite the supremacy of Taras this season in winning the title with 223 points, there were still great battles fought out for the minor placings, which show MICHAUD in 2nd with 193 points, Bosis with 178 points, Miglio with 139, Saunders with 129 and Aprilia on 118. The 1990 season promises to be even more stimulating as each team will come back armed with its own revolutionary technical advances. To be continued.